The tractor standoff, a tale of dirt, defiance, and daisies. The sun was dipping low over the rolling fields of Willow Creek, Kentucky, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was planting season, and I, Tom Bennett, was knee-deep in the rhythm of the land. My family's 30-year-old John Deere tractor hummed steadily, churning through the rich topsoil of our fourth-generation farm. With just 2 weeks left before the rains, every moment counted. That's when she appeared, Linda Marshall, a woman in a pristine navy blazer, her heels sinking into the soft earth like she'd wandered into the wrong movie. She stood at the edge of my field, arms crossed, glaring at my tractor like it had personally insulted her yoga class. Linda wasn't from around here. She'd moved into a sleek new house on Sweetwater Lane, a stone's throw from my property, and brought with her a clipboard, a reusable coffee tumbler, and a vision of suburban perfection that didn't include diesel fumes or dusty fields. She called my tractor an eyesore that ruined her sunset aesthetic and demanded I move it. I explained, as politely as a man covered in dirt could, that this wasn't just a machine, it was the heartbeat of our farm, the tool that kept the Bennett family legacy alive since 1910. She didn't care. She waved her hand, said she'd handle it, and marched off, her blazer flapping like a warning flag. The next morning, I was refueling the tractor when a tow truck rumbled up the gravel drive. A rusty hook dangled from its back, and Linda stood nearby, pointing at my John Deere like it was a stray dog. The driver, a wiry guy named Pete, looked as confused as I felt. He scratched his head and asked if I'd called for a tow. I pointed at Linda, who was now making wild gestures by my mailbox. "That's your client," I said, loud enough for her to hear. She stormed over, claiming she was the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, a group that didn't exist. She insisted my tractor violated her shared vista agreement, a term she'd clearly plucked from some online template. I told her there was no HOA here, just fields, cows, and people who minded their own business. She smiled a tight, predatory grin and told Pete to hook up the tractor. Pete hesitated, but Linda's insistence won out. He backed the truck up, hooked a cable to the tractor's front axle, and gave it a tug. The John Deere didn't budge. It sat there, heavy as history, rooted like the oak trees lining my property. My cousin Jake, who'd been watching from the barn, started recording the whole fiasco on his phone. Linda noticed and shrieked that he didn't have permission to film her. Jake, never one to back down, shouted back that she was trespassing on private land. The tow truck groaned, its engine straining, but the tractor held firm. Pete gave up, unhooked the cable, and drove off, muttering apologies. Linda, red-faced, demanded I move that monstrosity or face consequences. I tipped my hat, walked over to her silver SUV parked on the soft edge of my plowed field, and pulled a piece of chalk from my pocket. I drew a slow, deliberate circle around her SUV, marking the dirt like I was claiming it for the season. "What are you doing?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I grinned and said, "Just marking your contribution to this year's planting." Her eyes widened as I called Jake over with the irrigation hose. I grabbed a sack of daisy seeds from the barn and started scattering them gently over her hood, careful not to scratch the paint. Jake turned on the hose, misting the ground around her tires. By now, 2 neighbors, Old Man Carter and Miss Ellie, had pulled up in lawn chairs, sipping iced tea and watching the show. Word spreads fast in Willow Creek. When someone tries to tow a tractor in the middle of planting season, you don't just stay home, you grab a seat. Linda screamed about vandalism and threatened to call the sheriff. I shrugged and asked what rule in her imaginary HOA handbook covered uninvited car planters. She had no answer, just more threats. By the time Sheriff Dan Carter arrived, the scene was pure chaos. Me tossing seeds, Jake watering the dirt, and neighbors snapping photos. Dan, who I'd known since high school, took one look and asked what was going on. I told him, straight-faced, that I was planting perennials in a new metal planter. He turned to Linda, who waved a stack of papers she claimed were HOA regulations. Dan skimmed them, handed them back, and said, "Ma'am, you're trespassing on an active farm. You're lucky he's only using daisies." Linda's SUV, now stuck in the muddy field, wasn't going anywhere without a proper tow truck, one that could handle tilled soil. The neighbors, now joined by a few more, started joking about what flowers would look best on Linda's SUV. Someone suggested marigolds, Another offered to bring a garden gnome. Linda, fuming, called for a tow truck, but it took 2 hours to arrive. By then, Jake had uploaded the video to a local farming group titled City Lady vs. Tractor. It hit 50,000 views before the tow truck even showed up. As the sun set, I looked at Linda, stranded by her stuck SUV, and thought, this isn't over. She'd declared war on my land, my tractor, and my way of life. And I had plenty of dirt and Timmy on my side. The next morning, I was barely through my second cup of coffee when Jake came sprinting across the yard, waving his arms like he was trying to flag down a crop duster. "She's back," he hollered, pointing toward the edge of my property. Sure enough, Linda Marshall stood at the boundary of her self-proclaimed Willow Creek HOA territory, now marked with 2 glossy laminated signs staked into the dirt. One read, Willow Creek Homeowners Association, private neighborhood, no farm equipment beyond this point. The other was duct-taped to my mailbox, a move that made me itch for a crowbar. She'd nailed one sign into a cedar post my great-grandfather had set in 1923, a post older than her entire family tree. Linda wasn't alone this time. Beside her stood a woman in oversized sunglasses and a yellow vest, clutching a clipboard like it was a holy relic. I later learned her name was Marjorie, a retired parking enforcement officer with a chip on her shoulder and a whistle around her neck. She looked like she'd written tickets for jaywalking sparrows. Together, they were a force of bureaucratic chaos. Linda with her delusions of suburban supremacy, Marjorie scribbling notes like she was auditing the Declaration of Independence. They pointed at my barn, whispering furiously, as if my hay bales were plotting a coup. I strolled over, wiping grease from my hands, and asked what they were up to. Linda held up her phone, announcing she was live-streaming to her HOA's Facebook page. I glanced at her screen and asked how many followers she had. 42, she said, puffing out her chest. I nodded and mentioned I had about that many chickens in the coop. She didn't laugh. Instead, she handed me a stapled packet of violations: unauthorized farming within view of a public road, offensive compost odors, and visual obstruction by oversized machinery. I chuckled and shouted across the field, "You forgot the cow flatulence ordinance." Jake, leaning out the barn window, cackled loud enough to spook the hens. Marjorie, undeterred, started snapping photos of my truck, muttering about non-compliant vehicle storage. I asked Linda to show me the legal authority behind her fines, considering my land was outside any HOA jurisdiction. She waved a crumpled map, babbling about overlay zones and communal aesthetic rights. It was clear she'd Googled just enough jargon to sound official, but not enough to make sense. I told her to take her signs down before I turned them into kindling. She ignored me, and Marjorie blew her whistle, declaring my rooster a public nuisance. That afternoon, I drove to town to see Sheriff Dan. He'd already seen Jake's video, which had racked up 100,000 views and a slow-motion remix of Linda yelling about visual terrorism. Dan nearly choked on his coffee when I showed him photos of Linda's signs, one defacing my family's cedar post. He confirmed she'd filed 3 nuisance complaints in 24 hours: trespassing, agricultural defacement, and something called unauthorized community resistance. I asked if that last one was even real. "Only if you're starting a manure rebellion," he said, grinning. He promised to document her behavior in case we needed to press harassment charges. Back at the farm, I found Linda's SUV parked deeper in my field than before, surrounded by plastic stakes and a scattering of wildflower seeds. She stood there in gardening gloves, tossing seeds like she was blessing the land with her presence. "This is the HOA Harmony line," she declared, claiming it would boost property values. I reminded her there was no HOA, just her, me, and a herd of cows who didn't care about resale value. Marjorie, now wielding a megaphone, read off more violations: non-regulated irrigation flow and unsanctioned shed visibility. I'd had enough. With Jake's help, I loaded my truck with hay bales, a scarecrow dressed in one of Linda's HOA flyers, and a sack of birdseed. We drove to her staked-out Harmony line and started unloading. Every time she shouted, "You can't do that," I asked for the ordinance. She had none. Then I got creative. With Dan's verbal approval and advice from my cousin Sarah, a clerk at the county office, I turned Linda's SUV into a full-blown landscaping project. We laid weed barriers around her front bumper, built 2 raised garden beds, and planted marigolds and morning glories. Jake ran drip lines from our irrigation system, and within 30 minutes, her SUV looked like it belonged in a botanical garden. A few chickens wandered over and perched on her side mirrors, clucking contentedly. Linda emailed every local news outlet, hoping for sympathy, but the story had already taken off online. Farming blogs picked it up, with headlines like "City Newcomer Tries to Tow Tractor, Gets Planted Instead." Jake's video hit 200,000 views, complete with a banjo soundtrack someone added to Linda's seed-tossing tantrum. I gave an interview to a local reporter, standing in front of her flower-covered SUV, talking about respecting rural life and the legacy of family farms. The internet ate it up. Hashtags like Field Fight and Tractor Triumph trended, and a group of high schoolers started selling t-shirts that read, "Don't mess with the tractor." But Linda wasn't done. The next day, I caught a drone buzzing over my barn, nosy as a gossip at a church picnic. Jake grabbed his shotgun, but I told him to hold off. We'd handle this legally. Linda was escalating, and I knew she wouldn't stop at signs and drones. She was plotting something bigger, and I needed to be ready. I called a meeting with the neighbors, not just from Sweetwater Lane, but from every corner of her fake HOA map. We gathered at the old train depot, now a community center, and I laid out the evidence. Her signs, her citations, her trespassing. Old man Carter stood up, his voice shaking, and said, "If she wants a war, she'll get one, but I'm bringing my banjo." We formed a group called Keep Our Fields, and within days, we had petitions, posters, and a plan to shut Linda down for good. The air in Willow Creek carried a new tension after Linda's drone buzzed my barn. It wasn't just the hum of her high-tech toy that set my nerves on edge, it was the realization that she wasn't just a nuisance anymore. Linda Marshall was playing dirty, and I had a sinking feeling she'd go further than signs and fake citations. My suspicions were confirmed the next morning when a neighbor, Old Man Jenkins, called to report a strange crew on the far edge of my property. I grabbed my keys, hopped into my pickup, and sped down the dirt road, dust trailing behind me like a battle flag. Sure enough, beyond the east field, 3 guys in neon vests were unloading equipment. One was revving a chainsaw, another hammered stakes into the ground, and the third scribbled on a clipboard, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I slammed the truck door and shouted, "What do you think you're doing on my land?" The clipboard guy handed me a crumpled work order, claiming they were hired for rural aesthetic enhancement and vegetation removal. At the bottom, in bold print, was Linda's Nomino County seal, no permit, just her SUV's license plate as the return address. I told them to pack up or I'd call the sheriff. The chainsaw guy shut off his machine, and they started mumbling excuses. Sheriff Dan arrived in under 10 minutes, his cruiser kicking up gravel. He checked their IDS-2 had expired licenses, and the third admitted he didn't even know Linda. He thought they were working for a developer prepping a wellness village. It hit me like a bale of hay. Linda wasn't just harassing me. She was trying to sabotage my farm to push her vision of boutique shops and yoga studios. Dan escorted the crew off my land and told me to keep my trail cams rolling. That night, Jake and I rigged motion sensor floodlights around the fields, mounted cameras on fence posts, and added fake security boxes with blinking red lights to spook any trespassers. We weren't taking chances. The next few days brought eerie signs of trouble. Irrigation pipes were unscrewed, leaving water pooling in the wrong places. Rows of seedlings were trampled not by deer, but by human boots. One morning, a compost bin was flipped, its contents scattered like a toddler's tantrum. The cameras caught blurry figures in hoodies, always just out of focus. Linda wasn't working alone anymore. She had help, whether paid or brainwashed by her suburban crusade. I called another community meeting, this time at my farm. We dubbed it the Sunflower Stand, a mix of potluck, bluegrass music, and war council. Neighbors brought casseroles, folding chairs, and righteous anger. I stood on my flatbed truck and laid out the evidence: tampered pipes, ruined crops, and Linda's fake work orders. The crowd was livid. Miss Ellie, who'd been farming longer than I'd been alive, said, "This ain't just about your tractor, Tom. She's coming for our way of life." We organized night patrols, with neighbors taking shifts to drive the back roads or walk the fields. One guy, Hank, brought his hunting dogs, their barks echoing through the woods. Within 2 days, the sabotage stopped Linda's crew, whoever they were, didn't like the spotlight. But I wasn't done. I had an idea brewing, something to make her antics a permanent lesson. With help from the local high school art teacher, Miss Clara, and a welder friend, Ray, we turned Linda's abandoned SUV into a monument. What started as a joke daisies scattered on her hood became the Garden of Defiance. We built a wooden arch over the SUV, letting morning glories climb its frame. A path lined with placards told the story. Linda's tow attempt, her trespassing, her fake HOA. Kids took selfies with it, tourists stopped for photos, and someone left a gnome dressed as a sheriff holding a tiny citation book. The garden wasn't just art, it was a warning to anyone who thought they could bulldoze our roots. Linda didn't take it quietly. A week later, a black sedan pulled up, and a nervous-looking man in a suit handed me a stack of legal papers. Linda was suing the county, claiming collusion with radical farm insurgents. I laughed, signed for the papers, and tossed them on the porch. The claims were absurd, but I wasn't naive. She was desperate, and desperate people do reckless things. I called Sarah at the county clerk's office, who confirmed Linda had been lobbying the planning board to rezone our farmland for mixed-use development. Her plan? Flatten half the valley for coffee shops and lofts, erasing family farms like mine. She'd submitted glossy proposals, complete with fake community support letters. I shared this at the next Keep Our Fields meeting. The room gasped as I passed around her rezoning packet, marking Jenkins' Orchard as a future parking conversion zone and Ellie's Dairy as an artisan loft district. Hank stood up, slamming his fist on the table. If she wants our land, she'll have to drag me off it. We doubled our efforts. Petitions grew, posters multiplied, and Sarah dug up property records going back 60 years to prove our claims. Jake posted drone footage of Linda measuring my field with a ruler, looking baffled by the concept of acreage. The internet loved Ida. Cartoonist drew her wrestling a giant sunflower, and Field Fight hit national trending lists. Linda doubled down, posting on her HOA page about rural backwardness and accusing us of forming a vigilante mob. She even claimed my scarecrow was making threatening gestures at sunrise. A lifestyle blog exposed her past, revealing she'd been kicked out of 2 HOAs for excessive lawsuits and starting garden militias. The stage was set for the county zoning meeting, where Linda planned to pitch her development dream. We planned to show up and force farmers, teachers, mechanics, even kids with a school project on rural rights. The battle was coming, and I could feel the soil itself bracing for it. The county zoning meeting was set for a Tuesday evening at the Willow Creek Community Center, a red-painted building that once served as a train depot. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Linda Marshall had been building up to this moment, her chance to pitch her grand vision of turning our farmland into a pastel-colored paradise of juice bars and yoga studios. But we were ready. The Keep Our Fields coalition had spent weeks preparing, and the room was packed with farmers in overalls, teachers in button-ups, mechanics in work boots, and a group of high schoolers who'd turned the whole saga into their civics project. Even Old Man Jenkins brought his banjo, though he promised not to play unless things got too civilized. Linda arrived like she was walking onto a TED Talk stage, wearing a sharp gray pantsuit and carrying a foam board mock-up of her Willow Creek Wellness Village. It featured cardboard trees, stick-on yoga mats, and a coffee shop labeled Artisan Brews. She opened with a speech about progress, community evolution, and elevating rural aesthetics. Her slideshow flagged problematic properties, my farm, Jenkins' Orchard, Ellie's Dairy, all marked for rezoning. The crowd murmured, hands tightening on petition folders. When she called my tractor a visual blight, Hank let out a snort so loud it echoed off the rafters. When it was my turn, I walked to the front with a thumb drive and a projector. I didn't need glossy boards, just the truth. I played a compilation of Linda's greatest hits, her screaming at Sheriff Dan, arguing with my chickens, trying to tow my tractor, and standing in my field yelling about tulip rights while I planted daisies around her SUV. The room erupted in laughter when her voice cracked on visual terrorism. Then I got serious. I handed the board a folder stuffed with evidence, notarized property records, drone footage of her trespassing, and 300 signatures from neighbors opposing her plan. Sarah had cross-referenced every parcel, proving none of us had ever agreed to an HOA. I closed with a simple statement. You can build a sidewalk, but you can't pave over a community. The board didn't need long to deliberate. After 20 minutes, they returned with a unanimous vote to reject Linda's rezoning request. The crowd cheered, Jenkins strummed a triumphant chord, and the mayor snapped a selfie with Jake, who was holding a "Don't Tread on My Tractor" sign. Linda's face froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Marjorie, her loyal sidekick, put a hand on her shoulder, but it looked more like a funeral than a strategy session. Linda stormed out, muttering about appeals and small-minded farmers. Someone cut a tractor-shaped cake, and the room turned into a celebration of dirt, roots, and victory. But I knew Linda wouldn't go quietly. The next morning, I found a new stack of papers on my porch, her civil lawsuit against me, claiming defamation, property damage, and eco-anxiety from non-consensual rural aesthetic violations. The county clerk's office, where Sarah worked, nearly shut down from laughter when they read that one. Still, a lawsuit was no joke. I met with my lawyer, Rachel, a no-nonsense woman who grew up baling hay and could spot nonsense a mile away. She helped me countersue for trespassing, harassment, attempted theft of farm equipment, and establishing a fraudulent HOA. We compiled a binder of evidence, timestamps, videos, witness statements, and even Marjorie's handwritten violation notes, which Sarah had gotten from a guilty-looking Marjorie herself. The lawsuit wasn't the only thing brewing. Linda had been quietly meeting with a shady developer, pushing for preliminary land prep without permits. One evening, Jenkins called to say he'd seen unmarked trucks near his orchard, unloading what looked like surveying gear. I drove out with Dan, who caught two guys staking out my back field. They claimed they were hired for soil testing by a Ms. Marshall. No permits, no paperwork, just another of Linda's rogue moves. Dan sent them packing and added it to the harassment file. Meanwhile, Jake's videos kept spreading, now at 500,000 views. A local folk singer wrote a song called "The SUV That Got Planted," and it hit the community radio charts. T-shirts sold out at the high school. The Garden of Defiance grew more elaborate. Miss Clara's art students added painted signs, "Respect the Roots," and "No Fake HOAs." Tourists stopped by, leaving trinkets, a tiny tractor model, a gnome with a pitchfork. Linda's SUV, still stuck, was now a local landmark. But the real turning point came when a national news outlet called, wanting to feature our story in a segment on urban sprawl versus rural life. I agreed, but only if they showed the whole picture. Not just the drama, but the community, the legacy, the land. They arrived with cameras, touring the fields, the Scarecrow Gallery, and the planted SUV. I showed them Sarah's property records and Jake's drone footage of Linda's antics. The story aired, and Field Fight went viral again, retweeted by farmers, environmentalists, and even a few celebrities. The county council, spooked by the attention, passed an ordinance banning unauthorized HOAs and requiring public review for zoning changes. They also introduced a right to rural use policy, protecting farms from interference. Linda's dream was crumbling, but she wasn't done. She announced an emergency HOA meeting in her driveway, attended only by Marjorie, who brought a fruit tray and a folding chair. Linda's 20-minute speech about landscape control was live-streamed to her 48 followers, most of whom were probably bots. Jake framed a screenshot of her rant and hung it in the barn next to a rusty horseshoe. As the court date loomed, I felt the weight of it all: the land, the legacy, the fight. Linda wasn't just a nuisance. She was a symbol of something bigger, a clash between those who build on the past and those who want to erase it. I wasn't just defending my tractor or my farm, I was defending Willow Creek and every root that held it together. The courtroom in Willow Creek's county courthouse smelled of old wood and fresh tension. The day of Linda Marshall's lawsuit had arrived, and the room was packed tighter than a grain silo at harvest. Farmers in denim, townsfolk in Sunday best, and a few high schoolers with "Don't Tread on My Tractor" shirts filled the benches. I, Tom Bennett, sat with my lawyer, Rachel, who'd spent the last week turning our evidence into a fortress: videos, timestamps, property records, and witness statements bound in a binder thick enough to stop a plow. Linda walked in flanked by two lawyers who looked like they'd never seen a dirt road, her blazer starched stiff as her resolve. She avoided my gaze, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench like she was about to argue before the Supreme Court. The judge, a grizzled man named Harlan Wright, had a reputation for cutting through nonsense like a combine through corn. Linda's lawyers opened with a theatrical speech, painting her as a visionary reformer tormented by a rogue farmer who'd weaponized daisies and internet fame to ruin her reputation. They claimed my planting flowers around her SUV caused permanent emotional distress and altered her relationship with personal transportation. A few folks in the back stifled laughs. Rachel stood next, her voice steady as a tractor's hum. She laid out the timeline: Linda's fake HOA, her trespassing, her attempt to tow my John Deere during planting season, and her secret rezoning scheme to turn our farms into strip malls. She played Jake's highlight reel: Linda yelling at chickens, threatening Sheriff Dan, and waving her fake citations. The courtroom chuckled when her voice cracked on visual terrorism. Witnesses took the stand. Sheriff Dan recounted responding to Linda's baseless complaints, each call a waste of county resources. Old Man Jenkins testified about her rezoning packet, which marked his orchard for parking conversion. Then came Marjorie, Linda's former sidekick. To everyone's shock, she'd flipped. Under oath, she admitted she'd followed Linda blindly, assuming her authority came from sounding official. The room buzzed when Marjorie confessed Linda's HOA was cobbled together from online templates. Linda's face turned the color of overripe cherries, her lawyers scribbling furiously. When I took the stand, I spoke from the heart. I told Judge Harlan about my family's farm, in our blood since 1910, and how Linda's actions threatened not just my livelihood but the soul of Willow Creek. I admitted the SUV garden was a bit cheeky, but it was my way of drawing a line in the dirt literally. Farming's not just a job, I said. It's a promise to the land and the people who came before us. Linda tried to break that promise, and we just planted it back. The room was silent, save for a few nods and a soft amen from Miss Ellie. After closing arguments, Judge Harlan took 30 minutes to deliberate. He returned with a verdict that hit like a thunderclap. Linda's lawsuit was dismissed. Her HOA was declared fraudulent, her rezoning scheme reckless, and she was ordered to pay all legal fees, including the county's costs for her baseless zoning requests. Looking straight at her, he said, "You tried to plant control where community already grows, and you failed because you never understood the roots." The courtroom exhaled, a collective release of months of tension. Someone clapped, then another, until the room was a roar of approval. Linda gathered her papers, her dignity in tatters, and walked out without a word. That was the last we saw of her. Rumor had it she moved to a suburb 3 states away, chasing another dream of control. Her SUV stayed, now a permanent fixture in my field, draped in morning glories and daisies. The Garden of Defiance became a local legend, drawing visitors who left tokens: tiny tractors, painted rocks, even a gnome dressed as a judge. A folk singer's ballad, the SUV that got planted, climbed the local charts, and the high school sold enough t-shirts to fund a new computer lab. The county's new ordinances banning fake HOAs and protecting rural land ensured no one could pull a stunt like Linda's again. The fight changed Willow Creek. Keep Our Fields became a permanent group, hosting workshops on property law and helping young farmers navigate regulations. We put up signs at the town's edge: no fake HOAs, no trespassing, no trouble. The community grew tighter, sharing tools, seeds, and stories over potlucks and bluegrass nights. One evening, as I watered the marigolds around Linda's SUV, I found a letter in my mailbox. No signature, just a note in familiar handwriting. "You won, but you taught me something. I thought control was progress. It's just loneliness. Keep the flowers blooming." I tucked it away in the barn, never telling a soul. Some victories don't need shouting. The SUV stayed, a quiet monument to a battle won not with fists but with flowers, fences, and truth. Each season, I added something: Nawa wreath in spring, lights in winter, because some stories don't fade, they grow. If anyone asks why there's an SUV sprouting daisies in my field, I just smile and say, that's what happens when you try to tow a tractor during planting season. This story is about more than a tractor and a field. It's about standing up to injustice, defending what's yours, and finding strength in community. What do you think about the way Tom and his neighbors fought back? Was their response to Linda's aggression justified, or did they go too far with the Garden of Defiance? How would you handle someone trying to impose their will on your way of life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take on violence, justice, and standing your ground. Let's keep the conversation growing.